Everyone will have their own idea about what makes a game fun. We are all different. We have our quirks and our eccentricities, and it is impossible to make a game that is perfectly suited to everyone. The world is, after all, complex and messy. So when Firaxis developers set out to build Civilization VII, they were building on a game that had 30 years of success and a loyal fanbase behind it. When Sean Bean recently reminded us,
"Don't reinvent the wheel. Just realign it."
many wondered why they did not follow this sage advice. It has been widely reported that Civ developers specifically aimed to address a few key issues that they saw creeping up in online forums as weaknesses in their previous games. But were these perceived weaknesses merely a myth? What parts of the game really needed fixing or realigning? Who were Civ developers trying to satisfy with the changes that they made? And did it work? Welcome to Civilization Stories, where we examine alternatives to history through the lens of the world's most addictive video game. If it ain't broke, don't fix it, is another famous saying that suggests that if something works well, one should avoid tampering with the formula too much. In addressing their core concerns, Civilization developers, whether they meant to or not, tried to reinvent their own wheel. They broke their own game and pushed away many players who were hungry for more and better of the stuff they already had. But it's because developers believed certain myths that circulated about previous games that forced them to look at what would become their new game in a bit of a tainted light. Have previous versions of Civ been perfect? Close, but no. But some of the things that a certain minority of players saw as problems with the game were never problems, and they never needed fixing. The voices of those complaints were simply louder than those of players too busy looking for just one more turn. So here are 7 myths that Civ developers bought into when designing Civ VII. Number 1. Civ players crave realism and accuracy. Okay, I'm starting off with the tough one, the sensitive topic, the one that has folks up in arms about how we view or discuss certain subjects. I've received my share of negative comments that my views on race and culture are narrow, unrefined, outdated, and maybe unfit for 2025. For my part, these are only issues for those who point them out. Civilization is a game. It is a game for all. I don't care where you're from, what you look like, who you pray to, if at all, or what you fancy. It's none of my business. But I do think that it's best to look at history honestly, warts and all. I don't think the game should shy away from sensitive subjects, and I think we should all be able to hold 2 opposing factual thoughts in our brain at the same time. I think it's important to recognize that certain things humans have done throughout history have been reprehensible and should not be a part of modern society, but those same reprehensible acts allowed civilizations to grow and flourish at the expense of other civilizations. It's fact, and it's ugly. But let's be grown-ups. Developers appear to have approached building the new game with a dose of sensitivity that is fine, but not needed. A lot of it is falling under the lie of perceived historical accuracy. There is a certain bias in professional scholarship that we are becoming better at untying the knots of the past and becoming even more acutely aware of challenges faced in earlier ages, even as we draw further and further away from them. So, when Civ developers have university professors fact-check their work and put city names within their historical context, it actually siphons off people who have a layman's understanding of history and geography, and narrows interest toward a small cadre of individuals uniquely in the know. One thing that is fun about Civ games is going, hey, I've been there. I've been to Bangkok a few times. Never heard of Krung Thep until a few weeks ago when I played as Siam. It's fun to see the names of cities and places that you know and build the world out in a different way where London is maybe sandwiched closely between Washington and Beijing. But most of the names in the game now end up sounding, as one commenter on my stories put it, like word salad. Honestly, I've already spent too much time on this point and prefer to move on, just to say that deep down, Civ players prefer playability over polish. I know players that have stepped away from Civ VII would care less if the game was simply amazing. But all things being equal, because there are so many areas to pick at, this becomes just another one of those things. Myth number 2 is that peace is preferable to war. In this reality, I agree. But one of the things that has always made Civ games fun is combat and the ability to take over the entire world. If Dr. Evil played video games, it would be old versions of Civ. One of the things I loved about Civilization V and VI was that they changed up the domination victory conditions to controlling all of the original capital cities. It meant that you could take over the entire world, not just 67% of it. In Civ VII, developers have pumped the brakes on aggressive players by instituting a series of mechanics aimed at preventing civilizations from breaking away and growing too large. The new militaristic legacy path is incredibly soft and requires very little aggression on the part of players. Yes, they included all of the sticks and stones and nuclear bombs of previous games. God only knows what would happen if they took them out, but there is very little incentive to use any of it. The game, in fact, discourages you from trying to take over the entire world. Want to play as the toughest thing on two legs? Sit back and just complete Operation Ivy. It sucks the wind out of your sails if you enjoy playing as an aggressive warmonger, hell-bent on spreading their culture to every corner of the earth, and it turns the game into a tickle fight. I think I understand the intent here, especially in the case of multiplayer games where keeping all of the opponents in the game longer keeps them playing longer and involved in more phases of the game. The last thing developers want is players quitting because they are getting their asses handed to them. That brings us to myth number 3, that single-player games and multiplayer games are essentially the same. They are not. The way the game is set up, players enter the lobby and boot up a game and from turn 1, find themselves in the same circumstance no matter what game they are playing. Single-player and multiplayer games are two very separate experiences and should be treated as such. Multiplayer is about pitting your skills against someone else's skills. Single-player is about immersing yourself in the game's environment. Multiplayer enthusiasts need to be efficient and calculating. They need to be shrewd and optimize every click. Single-player enthusiasts could be happy just putting down map tacks for an hour, only to see their best laid plans turned upside down by an aggressive horde of Gaizatai. It's the immersion in the world that captures their imagination. Pressures from the AI coax them into thinking on their toes and changing plans without the burden of an unreasonable human on the far end unwilling to sue for peace at any price. Single-player games are about exploring the depths of each civilization's uniqueness and flirting with new strategies. Multiplayer is about putting your tried-and-tested ways of reading the terrain and executing your best strategy to upend your challengers and win against all your opponents who started off on the same playing field as you. That leads us to myth number 4, that all of the civilizations need to be balanced. This didn't used to be a thing, but there's been a balance creep over the years as the Civilization franchise introduced overpowered civs that were super fun to play. I like when the teeter-totter isn't exactly equal. I find this makes for a more interesting game. Who cares if one particular civ is everybody's whipping boy until you uncover a strategy that allows it to use its unique abilities to overcome the AI? Balance is something that Firaxis developers prioritized over other aspects of civ building, which is why we are now forced to suffer through the torturous New Ages system, where all of the combat units start with the same combat strength and, as you progress through the tech tree, only get stronger 5 points at a time. So a tier 1, 2, and 3 Chevalier are strength 40, 45, and 50 respectively, which is essentially the same as the Courser which it replaces. The days of armor coming up against a stray warrior are over, and that is the death knell for Civ. I know it seems silly and inconsequential, but this is the kind of protection from ourselves that players never needed. It's actually what made Civ so charming. That brings us to myth number 5, that winning is the objective of Civ players. There's a reason why the 10-year-long game of a Reddit user playing Civ 2 into infinity until it became a dystopian apocalypse became so intriguing to Civ fans. It reminded us all that the game never needs to end. For me, when I finish a game, I see it as an opportunity to start a new one. It's the cycle of Civ games and the fact that they always play out a little bit differently that keeps us coming back. Usually there are enough toys in the sandbox to keep us interested and able to learn new things every time we play. One rival could become our most hated enemy one game and our best friend out of necessity the next. I don't mind that there is a goal or a purpose to games of Civ, but I don't think the games or the franchise should be defined by them. Winning isn't everything to Civ players. The most loyal players enjoy the process. Usually a win is just a credit to their immersion. Games where players feel less invested, they just quit. The last two myths connect quite nicely with this idea of winning. Myth number 6 is that players loved the beginning of the game and then got bogged down with the tedium of what it took to finish and win games, what many call late game fatigue. They describe the late game as a grind where they found themselves furiously clicking away at meaningless objectives knowing the game was already won. This says more about the generations playing newer games than it does about any flaws with the design of previous Civ games. Is the late game perfect? No. Do I feel I need a giant death robot in my games of Civ to enjoy it? Also, no. But the late game can be really rewarding, and even if the game seems won already, then damn it, win with authority and show it off. Bless the Hall of Fame, which is conspicuously missing from Civ 7, by the way. People love their yield porn, but what happened to showing off the Hall of Fame and the end screen that compared your rule to Augustus Caesar or Ethelred the Unready? In Civ VII, they have put the game on rails and made winning the chief objective. The aim now is to get to the end quickly and without great obstacles in the way, just to avoid a few extra clicks. And then when you do get to the end, there is nothing but a short cinematic and a single screen that says "Victory" as proof. There is no way to relive or explore the depth of your history. No stats of how many soldiers you sent into battle and lost, or how many you took down in the process of smiting your enemies. Damn it, when I get to the end of the game, I want to remember what it was all for. And that brings us to the seventh and final myth, that what bothered Civ developers was that players were not finishing games. It's sad that developers thought that this was a problem. It's not. But with Civ VII in no way reaching the acclaim of its predecessors, Firaxis developers, by now, must be painfully aware of what all of their tinkering to coax players to finish games has meant. In seeking to solve these non-existent problems, Civ developers looked under the hood, pulled out a few spark plugs hoping to make the game go faster, and now it barely even runs. By now, Firaxis must surely see that worse than players not finishing games of Civ is players not starting them at all. Anyway, let me know if there are any other myths about Civ players out there floating around and how those myths could affect the franchise positively or negatively. If you like videos like this, support the channel by giving it a like, commenting, or subscribing to the channel if you haven't already. And remember to keep playing and making your own civilization stories, your own amazing path through history, and I'll see you next time.